Welcome to the No Rain, No Rainbows podcast. This is a show about pushing through obstacles and hard times in order to live a happy and fulfilled life. I'm your host, Ted Phaeton, and it's a pleasure to have you joining us. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Let's grow. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the No Rain, No Rainbows podcast. And as always, a big shout out to our executive producer, Andre Suttles of Subtle Solution Media, helping this podcast be possible. Today, I'm excited to introduce our guest. I'm sitting here with Kamber Parker, another not native of Greenville, South Carolina, but resident of Greenville, South Carolina. Kamber, thank you for being on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me, Ted. I'm excited.
Absolutely. I am as well. And of course, I always love giving our viewers a chance to meet the guest and give our guests an opportunity to introduce themselves. So why not you do just that and let the guests know, or let the viewers know and the listeners exactly who you are and what it is you do.
Absolutely. Thank you. So my name is Kamber Parker. I am currently living in Greenville, South Carolina, but born and raised in Baltimore, Maryland. Came down to Greenville to attend Furman University and have stayed around ever since after a brief stint living in Chattanooga for a year. But I'm currently the development director for a local nonprofit, the Greenville Area Parkinson's Society, full-time. And then my side hustle is the Yo Pro No LLC, which is a company that I founded several years ago. And we help young professionals maximize their career.
Nice. And the first question I'm actually going to ask is relative to Yo Pro No and really kind of everything about you that I kind of found as I was researching you a little bit on your LinkedIn or whatnot is, so how did you get to where you are now?
Yeah. So right after I graduated Furman University, I moved to Chattanooga, Tennessee, where I worked for a Fortune 250 insurance company. Keep in mind, I studied communication studies and political science in college, so naturally insurance was the right step. I tell that joke all the time, and it never gets that many laughs, so you can laugh at me, Ted. So I went to Chattanooga, spent a year there, and to put it bluntly, it was a really hard year for me. I was pretty miserable. I went into it with a lot of false expectations. I think a lot of college students go into their first careers with, and in reality, it was it was the best thing that ever happened to me. But in that year, I definitely didn't believe that. And so I actually had kept in touch with my former boss for an internship that I had at Furman. So I was able to come back to Greenville and start working for the local nonprofit that I now work for. But in that whole time period, I started working on the Yo Pro No. It was really born because I was so prideful in that first year of my first career, where I wasn't telling anyone what was happening to me and how I felt like I was, quitting, and I didn't want to tell people what I was going through. And so naturally I turned to the internet and really couldn't find what I was looking for. And so that's how the Yo Pro No was created.
Yeah, I love that, because I think there's a lot of college graduates that fall into the career of their dreams. And I never going to forget when I heard someone say, it took me getting what I wanted to realize I didn't want what I got. And so many people fall into that. Why do you think that is? Like, why do you think we fall into maybe it'd be a career, a job, a situation that I guess it looks like all the glitter is gold, but it takes us getting it to realize that it's not?
Yeah, I think it's twofold. I think one, colleges, if you go to college, I think they do us a little bit of a disservice by only really showcasing a few key paths that you can take, when in reality, there are so many paths that you can take. One of my favorite stories about that I've interviewed with the Yo Pro No, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit, but I interview young professionals across the world. And one of my favorites was somebody who started off working for the Obama campaign in 2008. So she was there for 4 years. After 4 years, she was burnt out because it was a lot in those 4 years. So she ended up going and working for Airbnb next. She was in the legal department, but she went into Airbnb. Then she came back across the country working in politics again for a local governor, and then back out west where she started her own communications company. Completely, crazy path, but no one tells you about that in college. So there's so many opportunities out there. And so I think that's just not showcased. The other thing I would say to that question is I think social media also does us a disservice. I think people see the glitz and glamour of, working in these big corporate jobs. And they think that's the only option for them when, again, that is not the reality and it's just not highlighted. And that's something that I think we have the power to do.
Nice. And I would agree so much that when it comes to the opportunities out there, it's ironic that social media does us a disservice in that, or it's ironic that schooling does us a disservice in that, because those are supposed to be the places where we discover the possibilities.
Mhm.
That's supposed to be the spot that, hey, you could try this, you could try that. And the fact that you said before you went online and you couldn't find what you were looking for, it just goes to, I guess, how we're marketed along the way. What would you say to somebody who might not be a young professional? I know what the Yo Pro know, and a lot of people you interview are young professionals, but what if there's a listener right now, she's 45 and she's been in her career for over a decade, coming on 2 decades, and she's like, I'm ready to do something else, or maybe there is a young professional who is, 26 and they're like, this is just not for me. How would you advise someone go about that transition from like where they are to wanting to go into something else, much like you did when you wanted to leave Chattanooga?
Mhm. Well, the first way I would answer that is somebody that I work really closely with. I work with another entrepreneur who has been coaching me for the last year or two from Furman. He told me once when I was really kind of honing in on my mission and my message and who my audience was, he's like, all right, who do you see in Nike commercials? And I said, professional athletes. And he said, and who do you see in Gatorade commercials? And I said, professional athletes. He's like, well, do you drink Gatorade? And I was like, yes. Do you wear Nike? Yes. So even though my audience is young professionals, which is, according to the data, it's 21 to 39 years old. So even that 45-year-old, 46-year-old you mentioned, they can still take away a lot from the resources that we provide at YoProKnow. Same thing goes for people who are under 21. So it's just, that's my core audience, but it doesn't mean that others can't take advantage of that. And then the second part of your question, what would I tell those people about making that transition, is something I would tell the people that I, consult with and, help in their individual career search now, who are typically in their first few years out of college. I tell them, I think taking a year is really critical. If you're miserable and you want to leave a job within the first few months, I say you're also doing yourself a disservice, because you really need to see what the options are, because there could be another opportunity that you're just not giving enough time to flourish and see if that's even possible. But I think taking a year and then really looking at all of the paths that are available to you, going back to that example from a few minutes ago, the person who started off in, campaigning for Barack Obama, she knew that was definitely something she was, interested in. But after 4 years, she was like, I can't stay in this forever, and ended up starting her own company. So she went from politics to being an entrepreneur. And I don't think even that 45-year-old, might not even know all the opportunities that are available to her. And so really doing the research, but looking for the resources and people that can help you along the way.
Yeah, I think that's so true, because taking that year allows people to kind of silence the noise around them and find themselves in terms of what they want to do, and also just having a plan, doing the research, looking for the opportunities that are out there, and also asking questions. One thing I picked up from your story when you left Chattanooga to come back to Greenville is you had connections. You had the professor at Furman, you had the internship, and people that you were able to contact in order to make that move. How was that helpful in your transition? Kind of talking about you now and your experience coming back to Greenville, and how long did it take you to kind of get on your feet?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. And I think most people, out of the hundreds of people that I've interviewed who are young professionals, I think 90% of them would say connections are everything. And I wholeheartedly believe in that. And so pertaining to my own story, probably around February. So keep in mind, I started my first job in May. So right after I graduated college, started in May, reached out to my former boss, now current boss. I reached out to her just saying, I don't know what to do. I'm looking to you for some advice. And I actually haven't told anyone this in so long, because I always brought it up when I first started working for the nonprofit, but I reached out to her for advice. And she said, Kamber, I was literally about to post a job opening tomorrow because it was a team. She was a team of one. She had grown so much in the year that I was gone that she was able to hire a second full-time employee. And it was just one of those really fortuitous moments where we still talk about it. I just haven't thought about it in a while. And just right there, having that connection got me a job. Like I wasn't even looking for a job. It just so happened that she said that. And I said, I mean, of course I need to think about this again. I spent a year in that first job, but knowing that there was an opportunity out there that I could take a few months to think about, I had the flexibility. I recognized that I was really lucky in that situation, but it all came down to who I knew. So fast forward, coming back to Greenville in May of 2018, I quickly acclimated. I got really involved in the Greenville Chamber, Young Professionals Group. That has, just really turned around my life in Greenville. I was quickly able to find a community. I got involved in some volunteer opportunities, even outside of my nonprofit. And so for me, I felt like it was a quick transition, particularly because I went to Furman. Having that Furman alumni connection in town really does help. And I felt just like I was myself again in no time. Because in that first year in Chattanooga, although I love the city, I have no bad things to say about it, I really wasn't myself. And people who knew me then that had just met me and know me now, they would say I'm a different person.
Yeah. And I think our surroundings and the job we do really impacts us. I mean, it's what we do most of our lives, a third of our lives sleeping, the other third usually at work. So it's important to make sure that it's something you want to do. And it's amazing to have that kind of synergy in life of you reach out for advice and end up having a job offer, which is, I love that you mentioned, you're like, hey, I realize the flexibility there is not there for everyone. How would you, I guess, combat the thought and the idea of moving backwards? Because sometimes, especially as young professionals, someone like myself, for example, using myself as an example, moving over to the anchor desk, I went from something I was very competent in. I studied weather and meteorology in school, got my degree in that, and I had years of experience as a meteorologist, and I jump into an anchor desk where I'm a complete novice, and you lose your confidence in that. And I could imagine that a lot of folks, they don't make that jump, or maybe they hold back because they're afraid of starting over or going from scratch. How can you kind of get over that hump or that fear?
Mm-hmm. So this was something that I struggled with for months. I mean, I was coming from a 10,000 person employee company to, with crazy benefits, really, had a great salary at the time for a 22-year-old, and coming to a nonprofit where I would be the second employee in, little Greenville, South Carolina, and no benefits. I mean, it was completely opposite. But what made me take that jump was really just having this kind of sense of faith. I mean, it really was a leap of faith. And I'm not even a super spiritual person, but I felt like I didn't have anywhere else to go. And it was the best decision I ever made. And so again, I recognize that that's not going to be the case for everyone. I'm not telling people that if you take a leap of faith, your life is going to be amazing, but I have never looked back in the 2.5 years that I've been with the Parkinson's Society. And it's given me so much energy. I feel, again, like I said, a different person than I was that 1 year. And I hate that year took away part of me. But I've definitely come back. I've come back stronger. And it's allowed me the flexibility to really work on developing my company too. The YoProKnow has expanded in the last 2.5 years. It gives me so much energy. I think I mentioned this the last time we spoke. It's a lot of early mornings, a lot of late nights, a lot of weekends, but I am so dedicated and passionate about it. And I feel that just that 1 year, it was all it took for me to know that this is my passion in life and helping other young professionals in their careers.
Yeah. And that's what's amazing when you say give yourself that year. A lot of times we know when we're doing something that's true to our being. We know when we're doing something that we really resonate with and lean into. So it's great to be able to pick up on that. And I love the fact that you said leap of faith and never looking back, because a lot of us will have those dark times. And, what we would say in this podcast with No Rain, No Rainbows is, that year for you was necessary for the growth that you had now, because, it's the water that helps the flowers grow, right? the rainbows come after the storm. So that's what I always like to encourage the listeners or the watchers who are going through some of their adversity, going through some of their hard times, maybe that transition themselves to understand that there's going to be purpose to this time. And it's usually not going to connect until it's hindsight. I do want to jump into talking about Yo Pro No now, because I imagine that must have been a journey of its own, kind of getting that started and putting it all together. But of course, it all starts with an idea. Where did the idea first come from, and how did you go about turning it from something that was in your head to an actual LLC and the bunch of videos that you provide for young professionals now?
Yeah. So I'll try to keep this as concise as possible because I'm sure you can imagine it's been a journey. But it really actually started. So when I was an intern for the Parkinson Society in college, I actually had a second internship with Community Journals. So Community Journals is home to Upstate Business Journal, the Greenville Journal, Town Magazine, At Home, located here in Greenville. And I had this idea one summer and that was really the summer that I started to find my love for networking and connecting with people. So it all works, kind of overlaps. And I had this idea of really just starting a social, like an Instagram account for young professionals, highlighting the young professionals in the area. I wasn't even a young professional yet. I was a junior in college, but that was when the seed was planted. Fast forward a couple of years, I'm in Chattanooga. I'm working for this insurance company right around the time where I called my boss, where I just mentioned, my now boss, back in February. I had this idea where, again, I was looking online, couldn't find what I was looking for. And I was like, you know what? I'm not even sure what that is, but I'm just going to start interviewing people. And for some reason, this is what I feel like there's this force telling me to do something, and I don't know what it was. I was working ridiculous hours at this insurance company, and I still found the time to interview people. And so I would say the very first mentor I ever had, his name's Sean. He was actually my very first interview on the blog. So you can go back into our records, and he's there as one of the first ones. He asked me after I interviewed him and just asked him to record him. He was like, sure, why not? He said, what are you going to do with this next? Like, what is the next step? And I said, well, I don't really know. And from there, that's when it all started happening. That was around April of 2018. And I knew that he knew a lot of people. So I asked him to connect me to the next person. And that's when the idea was born for the Yo Pro No, in terms of creating this powerful network. So I'll pause right there and say the Yo Pro No, started off as just a blog. It was me transcribing every interview that I had with people, and people meaning young professionals across the region. It was really more regional at the time. And in that first year, March 2018 through March 2019, before I actually launched the blog, I just interviewed like crazy. I interviewed about 100 young professionals. I transcribed each and every interview after recording and just listening. And I mean, it took hours and hours and hours. But in March of 2019, I had enough content that I was able to launch the blog. And it took another year before I started to add other components like the podcast and the video series and the virtual networking happy hours and the career consulting. It took another year, but along that time frame, I added interns. I have had interns from Furman and from Loyola University in Baltimore. I've had tons and tons of mentors and people who have just really poured into me at no charge, which has been lovely as an entrepreneur. And then I've also been able to really utilize resources, again, with in those early mornings and late nights and weekends. I've taken advantage of all the opportunities. And as far as the LLC goes, I incorporated the Yo Pro No in September of 2019. So it's been a little over a year. And it has really seen the most growth in the last year.
Nice. And that's amazing for some of the listeners to understand that if I'm kind of following the timeline correctly, this was an idea 2 years before you really started working on it. And then here we are 2 years later with it really kind of picking up steam. So I always say, the things that last don't come fast, and the things that come fast don't last. And when we have something that is kind of itching in the back of our heads, that idea, a lot of times we tend to sit on it for a while. And I want the listeners to know that's okay. Because sometimes when you have an idea right away, the main thing we don't know is the amount of work it's going to take to put it into fruition, right? If you think about it for that long and you start really jumping into the process of it, I love that your first interview, your mentor said, what's the next step? Because we look at this big elephant, right? And a lot of people might see the YoPro know where it is now and everything you're doing with the social happy hours and the podcast, the video series. And they're like, I want all that. Well, it's like, hold on now. You got to take the first steps. I'd like to know some of the challenges that you kind of encountered along the way that some of the listeners might be able to get some benefit from if they have an idea of starting a series of their own, a website, blog of their own. What were some of the, I guess, blind spots that you had to kind of patch up?
Yeah. First thing was just it's like a roller coaster. And I know people hear that all the time, but it really is an emotional roller coaster. There are months where I'll be really discouraged. I was kind of in that time frame after, the beginning of the pandemic. I felt like I was on fire. We were adding things left and right. I had a lot of time, more time than I ever have, because I wasn't, traveling on the weekends, and I wasn't going to networking events at night like I used to. So I had all this newfound time. And I think that applies to other people, whether they do it, whether they spend their time networking or doing other things. People had all this time. And so I was kind of on a high. And then around between September and October, that time frame, I was really discouraged. And it took other mentors to kind of pull me back up. And I think that's something that people who are interested in starting something like this, a company, a website, a blog, you name it, you're going to get discouraged. Like it's not just always going to be this easy ride. And I'm sure you understand that too, Ted. So I think that's the first step. The second step is it's okay to try and fail. I've also had in the 2.5 years that I've really spent, working on YoPro since the initial interview. In those 2.5 years, I've spent a lot of time trying things and failing, and you would never know that by looking at my website. I mean, I was so amped about this ambassador program, so a referral system. So if you send one person to the website and they subscribe, then you get a point for, you get an incentive. And I had this great program all lined up, and I made it so it was free for me, which in hindsight, you need to spend some money to get those referral systems up and running, like companies like the Morning Brew or, the Skim. But I thought that was just going to be what was going to take my audience from 100 to like 100,000. And it failed miserably. I really thought it was going to work. And that's not the first time that's happened. It's not the last time that's going to happen. So I would say those two things, you're going to be discouraged. Trial and error is, I think, a must. And then the third thing, and it sounds silly when I say it out loud, but strategy. I rushed into a lot of things. I get really excited about things. And I think it's one thing that's really great about my personality, especially as a business owner, is I love executing ideas. And I have an idea. I like to get it done immediately. And I'm not a very strategic person. I'm just not. And I am working on that. And so now I have a really great and strong strategy, but it took me a long time before I actually created that. So if you can do that on the front end, which again, sounds so simple, but it's forgotten sometimes when you have a personality like mine.
Yeah, no, and I think there's a balance to it. I think there's definitely always a give and take when it comes to executing and strategy. Because I'm similar to you in terms of like, I'm really like, I like to strategize. I'm like the opposite. Like I strategize, but then I get bored with the mundane. Mm-hmm. And that kind of leads me to this question, which is interesting as we're coming to the last few minutes here of the podcast. How do you deal with balancing your strengths and weaknesses? Do you lean into your strengths and hire your weaknesses? You mentioned a couple interns. I'll feel bad if they're the ones that are transcribing all your interviews now.
Wonderful.
But yeah, how do you balance that with the strengths and weaknesses as a business owner and trying to continue to grow YoPro?
Mm-hmm. So this is something that, again, it's been a huge learning experience for me since I hired my first interns back in the fall of 2019. So it's been a little over a year, and my interns are wonderful. By the way, they're the reason that I'm able to do the high level work that I can do now. And so they're just fantastic. But to answer your question, hiring people who have, different strengths than me, is something that I really strive for. Right now, it's just, I'm not there. Interns come to me, and of course I'm going to look for if they can do the tasks that are needed. But as far as like somebody who is a business partner, I haven't found that. Because if I do take that route one day, then I'm going to look for somebody who does have, weaknesses where I have strengths, and vice versa, because that's going to be where I see the YoProKnow really stepping ahead. And so we're not there yet. But I will say I've been very fortunate. A lot of people reach out to me randomly. Sometimes they're people that I know from a past job, like actually from my first job. Somebody reached out to me earlier this year, and he was like, I really love what you're doing, and I want to work for you in some way. I'll work for free, kind of do like an internship, but more of an ambassador role. And I have about 5 people that help me out who are not interns. It's not the same as an intern because they're not getting class credit. So you have to remember these are volunteers. And so you have to be considerate of their time, but they're people who come to me. I see their skills, I assess it, and I'm like, you know what, Mike, you are really interested in the professional development component. So maybe we get you on virtual happy hours, or maybe we get you on a new idea. And so it's been really wonderful how people have reached out to me. And it's almost like a puzzle trying to fit people into the right pieces. But ultimately, I would love to be able to see this grow and hire people. And I hope that happens sooner rather than later.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's where the other challenges come along, is when you're building a team and placing pieces in different areas. What are some of the things you're working on building for YoProKnow? Some of the things you're excited about? I always mention, like, what are the rainbows, right? We talked a lot about the rain and the challenges, but what are the rainbows that you're working on now for YoProKnow that could be rolling out here in the next few weeks, months, maybe even a couple of years?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that. So I'm actually working on an ebook right now, and it's going to be really highlighting some of the biggest problems that young professionals face. One of them, I will give you a hint, and it's no secret, is work stress. We are young professionals, yet we're stressed all the time. I mean, I have done research for the last few months with young professionals, and that is the number one problem that they want to fix. Now, I'm not telling you how to fix it because I am not the expert. I am not saying I'm an expert, and it will say that at the beginning of the ebook. But after interviewing hundreds of young professionals, I feel like I do have some answers that I can share with you and how to maximize your young professional career. So that's coming out in the new year. And then hopefully towards middle of next year, I'm going to be rolling out some online courses. And that is something that I'm really excited about. And, only time will tell, but that's, again, going back to that strategy piece. That's something I've been working on for a while. And I think I'm in the right place. So I hope that people who are listening and watching today will subscribe and follow us and see when those updates are.
Absolutely. And before we kind of throw all the links out and everything for everyone, just one last question is, what has been your favorite part of this whole journey, the YoProKnow journey, the journey with the nonprofit from Chattanooga to here, to where you are now? What has been your favorite part of the whole thing?
Mm-hmm. The connecting with people. That is overlapping in every area of my life, whether it is, I've kept in touch with senior leaders from the first company that I worked at. I've kept in touch with great friends. I have kept in touch with people that I've interviewed 2.5 years ago. That's actually something that I have quarterly updates for all the people that I've interviewed in the past. And so that's a network in itself. And then specifically, one of the things I'm just very grateful for, and, we're coming up on Thanksgiving, so I am really grateful for this, is the fact that I've just expanded my network tremendously through this opportunity. Not only everything that I do, but YoProKnow specifically. I've been exposed to hundreds of people, and I feel like I'm really making a difference through that. And at the end of the day, my parents, who have been really supportive of me throughout the entire YoProKnow process, although at the beginning they were like, oh, what are you doing? Which is what a lot of people did ask at the beginning. But they always say, if you don't make a dime off of this, which was not my goal when I set out, but if you don't make a dime off of this, your network will like that will be your income. You know what I mean? Is the network that I've grown. And so I really stand by that. And that's been the biggest value to me.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of folks would agree that, a lot of us have heard the saying, your network is your net worth. And I don't mean that in dollars, but I mean that in kind of just like the value of life, even having the ability to call someone that gives you the flexibility of them hiring at the time to help you out. Sometimes it doesn't have to be monetary. Sometimes it's just that right phone call, that right text message at the right time to help you get through whatever you're going through.
Yeah.
Kamber, how can folks connect with you, follow all the work that you're doing with YoPro maybe kind of get some of the benefits that YoPro provides, listen to some of the interviews. And I know you have a lot of different sections, and you even break it down into different categories and industries for people. So if they have an idea of what they're interested in, they can kind of hear firsthand some of those experiences. How can they get that?
Yeah, absolutely. So first things first, you want to subscribe to our newsletter. So you can do that by going on to any page on our website, yoprono.com. So that's YoProknow.com, and check it out. There's a subscribe button all over each page, so you can't miss it. And that'll get you our weekly newsletter, which releases all of the stories that have come out from the week before. So we send it every Friday morning. You get a video and podcast interview, and you get a blog post, which usually is featuring somebody talking about their young professional experience in a certain industry. And so like Ted mentioned, you can check it out by selecting the industry that you're interested in. So whether it's marketing, law, medical, engineering, you name it, we have a lot of different industries for you to look at. You can also follow us on all of our social platforms. So it's just the YoPro handle on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. LinkedIn is definitely one of our most popular just because it is a career platform. So definitely take a look and see who some of our members are if you can. And then I'm always willing to chat with you. So if you're interested in connecting with me, it's Kamber Parker, KAMBER PARKER. And I would love to connect with you on LinkedIn. Just send a message and we'll chat.
Awesome. And I'll be sure to have all those links in the show notes for folks that are watching and maybe even listening. They can open it up in their iTunes app right now, hit the link and get to those resources. Kamber, I think our listeners got a lot of value from this. Some of them might even be thinking of making that career switch, and hopefully we'll be heading over to YoPro to get some of those ideas and feedback. I appreciate you spending the time today.
Thank you so much, Ted. I really appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure. And just recapping some of the things Kamber said for our listeners, because there was a lot of value, but the false expectations, a lot of times we fall into a job expecting something and it's not quite what we wanted. Again, we don't always know what we want until we get it and we find out we didn't want what we got. But it's okay. Kamber says, give yourself a year. Maybe find out if it really resonates with what you're doing, or maybe see what other opportunities are out there. And the fact that when Kamber went looking, she couldn't find it. Understand the misconceptions that we might get from social media, from school, the things that are put in front of us might not always serve us best. So it's always good to do your research, find what's out there, see the opportunities, and then give yourself an opportunity to try it and take that leap. Have faith. And of course, rely on some of your resources. Rely on your connections. Get involved in your community. Kamber mentioned when she was in Greenville, she was able to pour into the young professional community, and that helped her with her connections and even further. Of course, what's the next step? Any project that you're working on, it's easy to see the big picture, get overwhelmed, but take it one step at a time and understand it's not going to happen overnight. YoPro was an idea for 2 years before it started. She spent a year gathering the content before launching the blog, and here we are in 2020 recording this with so much more coming for YoPro. I'm excited for the bright future. I'm excited for the rainbows. Kamber, one last time, thank you for joining us today on the podcast.
Thanks, Ted.
And of course, to the listeners, we always say at the end of the episode that you don't want to forget to hit that subscribe button if you are watching on YouTube. And of course, if you're listening on the iTunes app, Spotify, or one of the many platforms that we're on, go ahead and hit that subscribe button if you enjoyed the episode. Share it with a friend. We'd appreciate that word of mouth marketing. If you enjoyed it, leave us a rating. Let us know how we're doing. And don't forget, you could also support the podcast for as little as $1 a month on our Patreon page. We really appreciate it. And as we always say at the end of the episode, everybody wants the sunshine, but they don't want the rain. But you can't get the pleasure without a little pain. Let's grow. The No Rain, No Rainbows podcast is recorded at Camaraderie, a collective workspace in Greenville, South Carolina, right off the Swamp Rabbit Trail. If you're looking for a place to grow your business, network with other professionals, and establish your own workspace, Camaraderie is the place to do so.